Greetings, everyone, and welcome to episode number 410 of Dial the Gate, the Stargate Oral History Project. My name is David Reed. It means a lot to me that you're here for me with this episode, here with me for this episode, rather. Peter DeLuise, writer, director, and producer of Stargate, is with me for this hour and a half. We'll see how it goes. If you are in the YouTube live stream, get your questions over to my moderators. They will get it over to me, and I will get a few of them over to Peter. It means so much to have.
And if you need to, you should pee now, because it's going to be a nonstop hour and a half of Goa'uld Stargate stuff.
Goa'uld Stargate stuff. Pee now or forever hold your peace. Very good. I appreciate you coming back around, my friend. How are you?
Well, it's my turn in the rotation.
It does kind of feel that way, doesn't it, at this point? I would never have imagined. Well, I only could imagine 6 years ago that wanting to create the Archive of American Television version of a Stargate ongoing series was actually going to be a thing. And Peter, I have you in large part to thank for making that a reality. And the fact that I've had the privilege to know you as well as I have and consider you a friend is so important to me, and it means everything that you're back. So thank you for being here.
Thanks. Oh, that's very, very sweet of you. And thank you for memorializing the project known as Stargate, so that everybody in the future can see, pull the curtain back and see what was going on behind the scenes.
Speaking of future, I'm pretty sure since we last had you on, there has been a certain update. There is a fourth Stargate series coming, and it's going to be largely shooting in London, UK. Martin Garrow is helming. Joseph Malazzi and Brad Wright are consulting producers. You've even got Dean Devlin and Roland Emmerich executive producing this thing. How did you find out? What are your thoughts? And just lay it on me.
I found out by watching the show Dial the Gate, when you guys were each in the corner there, and you and Joe and Brad Wright and Martin were all making the announcement. I went, "This is great! Wonderful news, Mazel Tov." I became Jewish for a second.
Man, I mean, did you think that this would happen, or did you think it was just a question of when and who?
I had hoped. I'm used to disappointment, and it was just such a fertile franchise. It just seems strange that shows like Star Wars and Star Trek, got to keep going, and wonderful shows like Stargate didn't get their, according to me, their due. And so I'm glad that they're revisiting that. Absolutely. And as soon as I heard, I fired off an email to Joe Malazzi and Brad Wright as well, saying, "Hey, how can I contribute?" And they're like, "Well, we're just consulting producers. It's Martin's show." And I was like, "Yeah, well, of course. I don't have Martin's contact, but thanks for letting me know." So we'll see if something comes of that.
Well, I would hope that a piece of it would get involved in Vancouver at some point. It's all.
Well, it doesn't have to. I mean, they have airplanes and everything. I could travel.
They do have these flying things.
I've been to England. I'm told I understand that most of how they speak the language there.
Yeah. No, I would be totally down to see your name in that opening tile somewhere. That would mean a great deal.
You and me both, brother. Yeah.
It's interesting. You said I've grown accustomed to disappointment, and I know that there's a few hundred people out there, either now or at some point in the future, who just listen to that, who are just going to sigh and go, "Uh-huh." Yeah, that's true. And the fact now that after 15 years, we're just a few months away from the anniversary of Gauntlet, SGU's final episode. 15 years ago. It's
Hmm.
it's about time that someone finally got their act together and said, "Look, something is working here." As far as I'm aware, SG1 has returned to Netflix and has already cracked the weekly top 10. And that
Really?
includes new content. So this is this is all good news. And it's a bunch of us are over here going, yeah.
Well, it makes sense
We've been waiting.
financially. It makes sense to re-educate the next generation and to get them excited about the show before they introduce the next one, the sequel, right? And it's the same universe as per your your information and what Martin was putting out. So
Mm-hmm.
that I was glad to hear it was the same universe and not a rewrite or a reinterpretation.
That's right. I think soft reboot would generally apply here. I think of Jurassic Park, where it's set in the same canon, but it doesn't require participation of the any earlier components. However, much like how Jurassic Park did, it's or Jurassic World, I should say. They seem to be doing that now with Brad and Joe, and well, frankly, Martin Garrow. So he wrote on all three shows. That was number one for me. The most important thing that when that Zoom flickered on 9, 10 days before everyone else found out, and Martin's face, I was thrilled to see. I knew Joe had been the one who would invite me and Darren on, and then Brad was there, and it was great to see Brad. And then I saw Martin, and it's like, I something's coming. But the second thing that put me at ease and has ever since is when Brad said, "This feels like Stargate." And I have loved everything that Brad has produced largely. I can't think of anything that I've seen of his that I didn't enjoy, including Travelers. And it was like if he says that, then I believe it, because if it wasn't the case, I don't think he would have said it. Now, is it going to be different? Yeah. Is it going to have a more modern tone? Yeah. The question is how much? And I imagine
Yeah.
you're just as curious about it as we are.
Well, of course, yeah. The only component would be the Stargate. I mean, it's right there in the title, right? So the that part and the mythology behind the Stargate would probably have to stay intact. If you're gonna say, well, the network of Stargates and how you can travel from there, because it's still the most amazing door into any story. All you need to do is walk through that ring, and anything could be on the other side.
That's exactly right. Yeah,
Yeah,
that and
and
beaming down, I would agree. Yeah,
with the advent of, well, even beaming down is far more limited, right? Because you always had to be on a Goldilocks planet, right? And
that's true
or
too.
usually had to be on a Goldilocks planet. I mean, they did use spacesuits on Star Trek once in a while, but the idea that you had to get close enough with a spaceship and then beam down, right? So it's in a way it's a way less or a much more imperfect way of telling a story, whereas you just completely blind once you turn that Stargate on, and literally anything could be on the other side of that thing.
That's certainly the case, and the advantage here is it's us, and it's not some idealized version of us. These are characters that we can aspire to, but not because they've achieved some moral perfection, like near God perfection in terms of uh, how they examine their universe. Like it's much more, it's the right stuff. You know, I think Brad said that at one point, which I've not seen, to my detriment. So
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah,
yeah,
you would you I think you would enjoy that. Yeah, that's a good movie.
it's on my list. I need to bump it up a little bit higher. What do you think? Like a fan of this. What are you most looking forward to watching? And what do you? I'm curious if there's anything that they because things have to change with every iteration. Every
Sure.
Stargate show introduced its own network of gates. What are the changes that you would expect? And is there anything that you would be like, not only do I hope that this will happen, I think it needs to happen to evolve. I'm curious, if anything.
Well, with the advent of visual effects and AI, there's almost nothing you couldn't try to achieve, and you have to keep a cutting edge, right? So at the time we had cutting edge technology and weaponry and drones. Drones was still a new thing. Not everybody knew what a predator drone was, and yet we were using those on our show. And the MALP and all those advancements. So that with the advent of robotics the way they are now, you would have to use something in that regard. And I'm interested in how they set up the team. If you look at Stargate, the team dynamic between the four key members of SG-1, there was a military side and a not
Civilian
military side.
Yeah.
And of course to validate the colonel's leadership, he needed a military underling in Carter, but she also had to be incredibly smart and help us. If it weren't, it fell on the Carter's character always to explain, to give us the exposition, and then to double it down for O'Neill, right? And then if it wasn't Carter doing it, then of course it was Daniel doing it, and he seemed to be the moral center of that was the function that he seemed to serve. And of course Teal'c was the brawn, right, and the alien element. You always had to have an alien element on the team. So Worf comes to mind, on Star Trek and stuff like that, and then of course Data comes to mind, where we have this other. You got to have an other on the team as well. And then the way that they all deal with each other, the North and South and the East and the West of it, was just brilliant, right? The original inception of that. So I'm anxious to see how they put the team together and what technology they use at their disposal, right? I mean, because if you remember from things like Star Trek, they had the tricorder, and it would do a bunch of things, right? So it was like a portable sensor array, and then also, if I recall, also McCoy had the thing he would
the probe,
put it near you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, you have a tricorder in your hand, but you need the former salt shaker. You know the story behind that, the salt shaker?
I think so, but for those who don't know, share.
So I believe that in the Salt Sucker episode, the props made this really fancy salt shaker, and Roddenberry went, "What is that?" And he went, "It's the salt shaker." And he goes, "No, it can't be. People have to recognize it as a salt shaker. It's got to be a." Yeah, but so he invalidated that problem. They went, "We'll use it from McCoy so he can use it, put it near your face while he's trying to figure out what's wrong with you."
So the original salt shaker was adapted into a medical device.
If I'm remembering correctly, I think the salt shaker was repurposed as McCoy's little doohickey thing that he was always holding near potential patients. Yeah. Why did I tell you all that stuff? Repurposing things.
Yeah, stuff evolves. Yes, exactly.
Stuff evolves. Yeah, the technology. That was my original point. Is the MALP was big and clunky, but it still had its function, right? You could put weapons on it, or you could put claws on it, or you could put sensors on it. And we had drones to flying drones to look. And now, I mean, we at the time we couldn't imagine those little quadcopter style drones that are in use all the time now, right? So, I mean, I've seen wonderful feature films where they use a swarm of what looks like drones, and they all have explosive devices in them, and they just send them towards the enemy, and they're helpless to overcome them. Right? There's only so much that you can shoot before all the drones overtake you. Right? So they have an enormous amount of technology and a much more sophisticated audience who's used to a lot more cool tech. So they're going to have to up their game many times over.
I think that by and large, the audience is more aware now than they were with the advent of all of this technology. So there's going to be a greater need for an even greater attention to detail when you utilize a lot of those technologies to tell stories. I imagine drones or some other version of a flying mount will have to be involved with this new iteration of the show, because if we're still going to uncharted worlds, you're going to need to throw something ahead of us that's going to be able to talk back. And I don't think it's going to be a six-wheeled, basically the size of a beetle that has a couple of car batteries on the back of it that's remote controlled.
It was almost as big as a smart car. Yeah, you're right.
That's right.
But I mean,
it was enormous.
But I mean, we've had as combat soldiers, for the last decade, have had flying apparatus that they were able to send ahead and look and see what was ahead in the battlefield, and thermal imaging, and there's all sorts of wonderful things. You know what? I should have answered your original question is I'm looking for the heart, the humanity, and the humor, right? Because that, for me, that's always the core of what any good show has, whether it be science fiction or not, is just, you got to be able to relate to it. So it's got to have a certain humanity to it. You got to relate to the characters. And if it doesn't have humor, I'm probably not going to be that invested in it, because humor happens even in the most dramatic of situations. Even at funerals, people laugh. And if it doesn't have heart, then there's no reason to stop your life and to give over your attention to this other, this entertainment. If you're not rooting for the protagonists, right? Yeah. So it's three H's. I'll go back to the three H's every time.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. We're putting these people that we are hoping that we can aspire to into extraordinary situations and just watching how they react. That was the thing that I always loved about any of Brad's stuff. No matter how mundane a situation, you give that man, a typewriter or a pencil and paper, and it's the interactions that they have with each other, wherever that space is, either fantastical or mundane, that makes it work. And if you have the right writer to pull it off, it's like, man, it's going to be entertaining to watch, because everyone has something to say if you're listening, and these characters will have something to say. So it's something that I'm really looking forward to. So
me too.
Arabian Lady wants to know, having written and directed the past series, could you pull a thread from the past that you participated in creating that you would enjoy seeing carried forward in this next iteration? I'm curious as well. That's an astute point, because there were so many. You had Unas, you had Jaffa. There's all kinds of things that you helped give birth to.
Well, so when the original enemy was the Goa'uld, then we had symbiotes taking over humanoid figures, i.e. humans from Earth, and also Unas from other. I thought, the origin story is always so great, right? So I don't know how. I mean, I didn't introduce this thread, but I don't know how you would introduce the premise, if you ongoing premise of the Stargate system, without also having the original gatekeepers, the people who seeded the gates all throughout the galaxy. I don't know how you don't talk about that, or at least touch on that in terms of a thread. I don't think that just because I introduced it to I don't know what I would have introduced that wasn't already there. I just investigated. I just did deeper dives into stuff that was already there, pretty much. The Janai, I do remember the Janai being, but that wasn't my idea. But I think I was tasked with that first episode, and the the idea that there was another group of human group that conveniently spoke English, but that also hated the the people that we hate. So the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Yeah,
for sure. No, and that was a complex culture that I think we really got our mileage out of, and I'm looking forward to talking about them here in the future. What Matthew Hammond wanted to know, whenever he had a chance to work with a family member on the show, was it equal parts excitement, trepidation? You know, David always talked about you saying, "Don't screw this up for me," or "Don't embarrass me." You know, tongue in cheek, of course. I mean, obviously, Dom. Or was it just another day at the office for you when these folks?
Well, I had worked with and Michael as well in Wormhole Extreme. He was so funny in that. I had worked with them on other things, but I was super excited that I got to, because I was living up here in Vancouver, and they're in the States, so it was a great opportunity to spend some time with them. But I always appreciated their humor and thought that they were really insightful. And I know David tells that story, that "Don't embarrass me," but I knew that because there was relationship type material with the Carter character, I knew I was like, try to take that a little bit serious. And he's my little brother, so I naturally I went, you can't be silly. You've got to service that story, because that's the function of your character. That, and bringing detective work into the fold. And of course, that was a thankless job, because everybody wanted Carter's character to be with O'Neill, and so he was this major third wheel. He's the boyfriend you don't. So David often, when he goes to conventions, he talks about the vitriol where they say, "Get out of there! We want Carter to be with O'Neill."
You can't, though, if you're going to keep the team going the way that it's going. You know, one of them has to go. So
have you discussed that
with David?
Have you discussed that a lot about
in general?
So the whole, the O'Neill and Carter can never consummate their love for each other because they're both in the military and the Air Force and not having it, right? That whole thing, and all those inventive ways of trying to get. Here's my resignation, kiss, right? So that during the Groundhog Day stuff, and it's in the future, and Moebius. I guess we could kiss now because it's all over now. Yeah.
Or alternate realities.
All these different alternate realities was super fun too, and I mean, this is apropos of nothing, but I'm just going to jump to it. Where he was on the boat, and they both, the nerd versions of them, had to go and seek him out, and I remembered that. They would look even more foolish if they had to wear those life preservers, which was not in the script, by the way. And I went ahead and I helped myself to the life preservers that were on the boat that we were using, and I said, "Put these on. I want you guys to look at vulnerable and silly. You know how the boat owner doesn't have to wear the life preserver,
but they do, because they're clients."
And the boats were still tied up to the dock, and I made them wear those silly light bulbs. And then, if you to her credit, you remember Amanda Tapping, when she pulled it off, it messed up her hair, right? And she allowed herself that. I was like, that is so funny. Yeah. The heart of that, and then the idea of later they admitted their mutual attraction for each other, and they're like, "Oh, usually I don't." But no, they're okay. Yeah, I like you. That's cool. And I was like, "Oh, good. We went there. I love that." Yeah.
A certain production designer shared coming down to set with his camera to get a certain photo in the back of the jumper of two lovebirds making out. Do you remember this story?
No, not yet. I don't remember it yet.
So James Robbins and I were going through.
Well, I'm a big fan of James Robbins. Hey, James, if you're watching, I love you. Mean it.
his images, and he got some great photographs of the sparks flying while the sparks were flying. And I think he said that you asked him to someone asked him to take them, and they just kept on churning out the sparks. And so he captured those tender moments during a take, and they're great pictures, and fandom hasn't seen them.
Oh, that's unfortunate. I remember thinking, wouldn't it be funny? I grew up on Love American Style, and they always had the fireworks at the beginning of the show. Most of the watchers probably have never seen that, but if you go on YouTube and you watch the opening credits to Love American Style, they had all the fireworks, right? And there were many shows where if two people finally kissed, they would be in front of fireworks, and the idea being that it was parallel between the feeling that they were having inside, and also they were surrounded by fireworks. So I was like, well, that's a natural. And they're shooting, the Jaffa that are surrounding the ship are shooting the crap out of the so we might as well do a lot of sparks when they finally kiss. And of course it was triggered by that, right? So it wasn't so subtle, but I liked it. And of course they had to stay lip locked while
it was good stuff, man. No, there were only so many opportunities for things like that to happen, and fandom did enjoy it. So, and if you do think that you're about to be taken out by a bunch of aliens with plasma weapons, would you not say, "Hey, I want to spend this last moment with you"? So
you should have
with you more than just
her.
with you.
Yeah,
I should have kissed her. You don't want to stand in front of St. Peter saying, "I should have kissed her." So,
Taylor Swift, Tay has that. Should have kissed her. Yeah, that's a great.
There you go.
You don't want to be sitting there thinking, I should have kissed him. You should have just kissed him. Yeah.
That's right. Consent.
Just kiss him. Yeah. Only if you have enthusiastic consent, of course.
That's it. Yeah, as long as it's mutual. So you can tell.
And enthusiastic.
When someone
don't forget the that's my favorite.
That's right.
Enthusiasm. Yeah.
Absolutely. Otherwise, so I want to talk about Descent. This was kind of a sleeper episode as far as I was concerned, because, and what I mean by that is it's the first episode after the 2-part opener. So you really don't know what you're going to get, other than it's more than likely going to be, from an audience perspective, it's more than likely going to be a lower key. Let's save some money now. We're in the first little financial trench of the season, because it does this and then it does this.
Are you really teeing this up as let's save some money? The one where we dunk an entire hallway underwater? Okay, right. Continue. Yeah.
Please wait, Peter, for the dramatic reversal.
Okay, sorry. I'm so sorry. But we'll edit that part out. Just kidding. I'm so sorry. I ruined your punchline. David, I'm so sorry. I ruined your punchline. Reset. Start over. I won't say anything.
So there was this episode called Descent, and it was the 3rd episode in the season. And usually at this point in the season, there's a little bit of a lull in terms of finances, because everything has been kind of blown out in the first part, and you kind of go into a trench, as it were. So with this one, I was kind of surprised when you decided to submerge an entire ship in an Olympic-sized swimming pool, if I'm not mistaken. And whose bright idea was this?
I don't remember a lot of things on the show, but I do remember this particular thing. Joe and Paul wanted to know before they wrote it, because they didn't want to waste any time writing something that didn't have the chance to see the light of day. They said, "Can we flood a chamber on the show?" And I said, "Yeah, we can flood it. We can flood the spaceship." I said. And I remember exactly how I showed it to them. There was a coffee table, which represented the surface of the water. And I took a Kleenex box and I turned it on its side. And I took the Kleenex box and I said, what you do is you create a room that you want to flood, and you I lowered the Kleenex box below the level of the edge of the coffee table. And I said, and that's how you flood the set. And they were like, oh, okay. And then they wrote Descent. right? So, and guess what? And guess how it ended up being? That simple description. Not that I designed the set. I just did the thing with the Kleenex box, but it turned out to be a piece of hallway that was redressed as two different spaces, and it was on scissor lifts, which were in a pool. Now, was it? I don't know if it was an Olympic-sized pool. It was a pool that I think that was being used for oceanic study of some kind, to study waves and stuff like that. But it was a large body of water. It was not meant for swimming, if I remember, but it was freshwater. I mean, you could put your face in it. And they built the hall with waterproof materials because they knew it was going to get wet. And it was essentially a hallway with panels that came off on the one side, and it was on a scissor lift, and they lowered the whole thing into the water, and then the water level came up. And then, of course, it had to have a ceiling because at the end, the good part is where the water gets to the top, and you have to be able to see.
Your dad's cutting it really close.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to have that scene.
Yeah, you totally do. And I remember that they had the waterproof housing and all that stuff, and they wanted to swim with it, but they kept the buoyancy of the camera housing kept messing with them, and eventually what Will Waring did, and I'm pretty sure, I mean, this is years later, so we're not going to get in trouble, is they put the dolly, the normal camera dolly, on the platform that was also holding up the thing, and they just mounted the camera with the housing on the camera dolly, and all Will had to do was sit on the dolly. I think he wrapped his legs around it so he wouldn't float. And he was just able to photograph it while sitting on the dolly that was not supposed to be submerged underwater. So when they returned it, I'm sure to the rental house, they were like, why is there wetness where there's not usually wetness? You know?
There was a great director's special created for that episode. I'm curious, did anything that was really done in the heat of it, did anything in that shoot not come off according to plan? Did pieces of the set drift into the water, or was it perfectly sealed? Well, was there anything? I mean, obviously no one got electrocuted, but was there anything that was like?
No, that's a good point too.
Yeah, was there anything that you had to work around?
Remember all those things that work around. We created an environment that we were going to flood, and it redressed. And there was removable panels. The reason why you remove panels is so you can get away from it, and also because it was too small to have the crew and the cameras inside of it. So it was really, if you think of it as one of the walls was not there. I mean, it could be there, but one of the walls we took away so that we could photograph, down that way and that way, and be able to see more of the stuff. If you're stuck inside of it, you can't see enough of it. You're so close, you can't see enough of it, right? So you have to get away from it.
You should do the whole interview like that, Peter. Go back like no.
So
you could do like basically a shadow box.
Yes, not unlike a shadow box. But if we needed those panels, like if once you turned it on, once you looked down the side, you needed some of the panels. And then if you were looking down the other way, you could take that panel and put that panel back in and look down that way. You're right about electricity. That doesn't go well with the water, but of course it all had to be made safe. And the edge glass, there was a lot of edge lit glass, if I recall. Remember all those things that Corin was fooling with when he was holding his breath?
Oh, yeah. The crystals. Yeah.
Which
they were bouncing in the water. They were either too light or something, and there was some interesting.
Yeah, I thought they were. I mean, I call it edge glass, but I think it was plexi. It's quite common. It's quite common where you. When you're making some artsy-fartsy sci-fi stuff, is you take what is essentially a light source, and you take something that doesn't have the ability to light itself, and you put the plexi or the glass itself up against it, and it conveys the light through it, right? Not unlike what some of those objects. There you go. Yeah. So even at a right corner, if you can't see the light, if you cannot see the flashlight itself, you could at least see how it illuminated the plexi piece, right? And then, so a lot of times that was a standby, a go-to on some of the sets, right?
Oh, all the spaceship sets, basically, all the Earth-based stuff. I mean,
Totally.
if they weren't using magic markers to draw X's and O's, and play tic-tac-toe on the Daedalus, that's how they did it. So it only made
Yeah.
sense. What was it? Yeah,
You asked about flooding. It was
yeah.
made porous, and the materials were not painted wood. They were plastic. They were water not resistant, but actually waterproof. So there wasn't. To my recollection, it was designed very well. John Smith, who used to be who was our producer on the show, had worked tirelessly on a show called Beachcombers, and he was the boat wrangler. So he was used to working with in and around water, right? So he got super excited when he heard that we were going to flood a chamber, right? And I remember that all that footage that we did, the flooding stuff. It was at most it was 4 or 5 pages. We used to do regularly 9, 10 pages a day, but because of the difficulty of that flooding, we only were able to do about 4 or 5 pages in an entire day, and because of the humidity it was an interior space. It wasn't a proper pool. It was an interior space that had a body of water in it. The humidity was quite. It was like working in Miami the entire time.
Did the cameras ever fog up?
I do not believe the cameras fogged up because we had the underwater housing on them. Yeah, so I think we were good that way. Yeah.
There you go. No, man, that's. Were you anticipating a slower pace for those pages, or did you go over?
Well, yes, because we only scheduled 4 or 5 pages for the entire thing, and we only needed that, right? So not only was Brad Wright an amazing auteur and great at entertainment, he was incredibly and still is incredibly production savvy. So if you wrote a set piece where you had to go out on location and you only had half a page, sorry, not half a page, half a day's work, he would write another half a day, so you had a full day at location to justify right? And because you wouldn't go to a rock quarry for a half a day's work. You'd have to have a full day's work, and then also it probably wouldn't be worth going to a rock quarry for just one day. So you'd go 3 days out, right? So you write 3 whole days of material to justify the whole unit going out there and shooting them, right? And then so every time that happened, if it would schedule differently, you'd go, okay, well, we need to change these. We need to change the page count in this place to justify why we're being there. And that was, especially on a show like Stargate, which had huge overhead, which set built, that was an absolute necessity for not going over budget. And Brad was all over that. He was constantly rejigging, making sure that we had the proper page count to accommodate the schedule.
Talks about flexibility. That's just wild. So you do what you have to do to get to optimize.
Not only that, but he also another thing which is somewhat relatable and to the same topic, which was our access to Richard Dean Anderson was limited because of his time that he was spending with Wiley, because he didn't have custody of Wiley, his daughter, the entire time. So his priority, as it should have been, was to be a good dad to his daughter, and so we had. Contractually, we had less access to him, so we had to really pick our moments and not have him be in every scene. And so the common phrase "we got to split the team" became a much bigger, more strict thing. So often, what you do is the team would go out as a foursome, and then we'd split the team. The 2 would go over here, and 2 would go over there. And then they would do whatever they had to do, gather information, and then come back and compare information, right? Now, splitting the team. And also you could ping pong back and forth between the 2 storylines, right? So splitting the team was necessary, but you couldn't always put Richard Dean Anderson with somebody else. Sometimes you had to just split the colonel off all by himself, right?
We're going to talk about that in Orpheus in a minute.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, it wasn't just Orpheus that it had to get done, and it was many times where we had limited access to him, and we would just accumulate O'Neill scenes. So normally you shoot one episode, you shoot it, from beginning to end, and then you're done with it, and then you move on and shoot an entire new episode and all the scenes that are required for that. But because we had limited access to Richard Dean Anderson, we had to scheduled scenes that didn't have Richard Dean Anderson in them. And then when we had access, we would shoot not just one episode, not just two, but sometimes 4 episodes of material that just Richard Dean Anderson was in. And then and of course the inevitable, what episode is this? Where is my character? What is my character? And so, but he was the star of the show, and so we were happy to do it.
You make it work. Yeah. Rob Cooper talks about Heroes. There's one shot. Heroes was shot almost completely second unit, and like Rick leaves. I forget where it is. It's somewhere in SGC. He leaves one scene with longer hair and enters the next scene with shorter hair. And Cooper was like,
"That sounds about right."
He got a haircut. Did anyone notice? Like, yep, you got a haircut. So we're just gonna do it. We're gonna roll with it. That's what you do. So you make it work because he's providing something that's so good that you wouldn't have it any other way. You wouldn't want to do it without him. And that was, I think, the thing that we as fans were so lucky about was, as far as I know, any chance that he could come and play back for 200 and a 2-parter on Atlantis, where he did a dive once again to save Atlantis in that situation with some dead man switches. It was golden, and it was just great to watch.
Yeah.
Ninja Jaffa were in this episode, Peter.
Okay.
And they pull out their katana or whatever it is, and then we cut, and then obligatory dead scientist on the floor, and we never see them again. I thought there was so much potential with this, and it's just you didn't write it. I'm not chewing on you about that.
Well,
but when you have someone with swords, don't you want to see a limb severed?
A sword fight?
Or a sword fight?
I guess you did. Well, we didn't. Did we ever sever a limb on the show? I don't think we were that graphic on the show, were we?
No. They cut into one in season 1, but I don't think a limb was ever severed. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's probably too graphic. But if you're gonna have a guy with a sword, you might as well have a sword fight, right? So,
sword against Scientific Notebook, I suppose.
I did a little bit of research on this because it's been a long time, and I do remember that invariably sneaking around motherships involved, big clunky Jaffa marching down the way, and you're tugging the thing, and they would go by and they just didn't seem very smart, right? And but the ninja Jaffa were stealthy, and they didn't have the big clunky armor on. They were able to bend. They could shrug their shoulders. It was awesome. And also, I think I had forgotten this, but I looked it up, and they were able to beat the censors because they went into Kelnorim, so their life signs were minimal, right? So they were super stealthy, and I was like, oh, great, we got a new kind of Jaffa. And you're right, maybe we should have investigated that a little bit more.
It would have been cool as an audience member because they came out and it's like, oh man, these guys are badass. So
yeah, they were badass, and I kind of wish that we had used them some more. Yeah, too bad.
Going back underwater for a beat.
Yeah,
my Stargate is dialing. Please hold.
Okay. Oh, is it on a timer?
When it gets low on battery, it starts rebooting. And I have to shut it off. So sorry about that.
Well, I hate when that happens. My Stargate almost never does.
Stargates, man, they'll get you.
Yeah.
How much prep do you recall Corin having with you in terms of this conversation. I know he had he had kind of planned for this, not intentionally, but he had always been working on holding his breath underwater. So this is something that he told us a few months ago. He felt that he had, kind of gotten ready for all his life. And then they had to cut the take because I guess a piece of plexi shifted in the housing, and you had to cut the shot. But that's how he remembers it. I'm curious to ask you.
Corin Nemec was a champ, and I remember watching before we did the big long take. He was pre-breathing. He was oxygenating his blood. He was ready to stay under for a really long time. Now, the shot would have been as long as it was for as long as he held his breath. He created that business to time out with his ability to hold his breath. So he swam over to the thing. If you remember, he did a little bit of an aileron roll there, and then he started manipulating the thing. And there was no rhyme or reason to it. He just had to move them around. It could have been 30 seconds. He didn't have to do it for a minute and a half. But that guy, to his credit, held his breath well past anything that we ever expected. And you're right. I think one of the things fell. He wasn't wearing goggles. He was just dealing with, his eyes, as anyone knows who's been in a pool, has opened their eyes. It's blurry. So he had to grab a piece of plexi, I believe it was, and shove it into a slot and move it this way and that way. And one of them fell out of the way, and it looked like a mistake. It didn't look like it's something that we could keep in the movie. So we did in fact have to cut around that one thing. But that guy, I was a witness, held his breath forever, and it was very impressive to see that.
Wow, that is so cool, man. One of my favorite effects in the entire franchise was the rings moving that body of water from one part of the ship to the other with Jonas inside of it. Dump.
Yeah. That was cool. Because it doesn't just transport the human beings in there. It doesn't separate them from their. Because why wouldn't it? If you transport it in the rings, why wouldn't just a naked body show up and your clothes would be left behind? Anything that was inorganic. It was just everything that was in the rings was going to come with you, right?
They established that in the movie, yeah.
Yeah, so that was going to be pretty cool. And they did the water dump. I think we had a dump tank. Is that how it went? We filled it with oil, and we used a dump tank that was triggered and went, and everyone, oh my God, yeah. And water, CG water. I think it was enhanced, but any CG water element was going to be going to have trouble because CG water back then was not an easy thing, right? So it had to be real water, and it had to interact with their bodies, and it had to spill everywhere. Yeah.
So was fun. So he was underneath that deluge, I'm guessing, or was he inserted later? Okay.
If memory serves, we had to dump. Well, they had to be, and then they dumped the water, right? So isn't that how that worked? Yeah.
Yes. Just absolutely mind-boggling.
Didn't we do that twice? Oh, I'm sorry about this.
Oh no, only one for that. The Cull Warriors were Cull was dumped out of the underside of the cargo ship in Evolution 2. That was a cool effect, and then the rings just flew away. But that was the only similar time that was the case. So
no, it wasn't just Corin, wasn't it? All three of them we got with the water.
Just him.
It was just Corin.
Yeah, that was his heroic moment to make up for what happened with Daniel in Meridian. That was his turn. He had been lamenting with Tilk the fact that he was only able to illustrate that he had done something intellectual with helping out the team in terms of getting the Stargate out of Cheyenne Mountain. He was always having an issue with knowing what to do in the heat of the moment and doing it. And that was his moment to shine. And it was a great sequence in the show. So I remember finishing that and thinking, how did they do that? it's just because I thought that water had to have been digital, and the fact that I found out later that it wasn't, that it was at least very much in part a dump tank that had achieved that effect, because the way that the water expands, hits the back wall, and then comes and the sides, and then comes forward again, was just cool, and it holds up to this day.
Nothing like a good old dump tank.
That's it.
Yeah, it's a good visual. Yeah.
And a good nod to Dagwood as well. That was very nice.
Right.
I appreciated that and caught it.
That was an interesting little Easter egg, Dagwood. So I was a character I played on Sequest, so we had to reference that and also it was water related. So Sequest was in the ocean, and so it seemed like a natural tie-in for an Easter egg cameo.
That's it. Any words for Colin Cunningham? I was always excited when they found a way to get the Pentagon involved, and I think that was his one off-world mission. I think it was like, this is great to bring that character back. Was it
off-world, or was it just in
orbit?
On world. In orbit. Okay, so I always like Colin. Colin. I tell you what, Colin's career is very interesting. He's gone, and he's all the different looks. He's quite the chameleon. I don't know. I think he's doing. Didn't he do Kevin Costner's movie?
He did.
Yeah. He looks almost unrecognizable in that. Yeah. So he's quite, and also Falling Skies. He was great in Falling Skies, and you wouldn't recognize him either because he's not well groomed, and he doesn't have a high and tight haircut like he does. Yeah, I always thought that he was a top-notch actor, and he was just ready to play and ready to give her, right? Yeah, and I don't remember exactly. Oh, he he heard the voices, and he heard the weird sound, and he goes, "That sounds like distorted voices." Didn't he start? They gave him a seed of an idea, and then Carter said, "Oh, I will check it out."
Entirely possible that that's the case.
Something like that. Yeah.
I didn't actually rewatch the episode and prep for this. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I just went through my memory.
My God. I'm surprised you're able to get underwear and pants on with all you do. You are wearing underwear and pants as we speak, right?
Yes.
Calvin Klein's? Yeah. Okay.
No.
No,
too expensive.
No? Okay.
Yeah.
I appreciate the extra support.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
so am I.
Colin Cunningham, I would work with that guy any day of the week. He was always awesome. He always came to play, and he knew his lines. God bless him. He knew his lines, and he executed. He always executed, and he's an awesome actor's director. He's a good director's actor because he brings something. Instead of you having to pull something out of him, which I don't always have time for. And every director go, "Oh my God, we're gonna have to work on that." But you come to play, you know your lines, and you have you were ready to contribute, and he always did. Yeah, so I always liked him for that. And then the proof of the fact that he's still working.
Oh man,
and he's doing parts that are completely unrelated, unrecognizable stuff he's done before.
That's the thing. He's just Chameleon is very good. I've just seen him in the Pendragon Chronicles, and he is this old king he is completely unrecognizable. It's just an extraordinary transformation. The man can pull anything off.
And he's an excellent close-up magician. Have you ever seen him do some magic?
Yes.
That guy's a Renaissance man. Oh, neat.
Yeah. He's a friend. He's something else for sure. Let's take an aside for a moment here, because you said something that's very interesting. That is something actually that I have always wanted to talk about with you. But I always line up these episodes, and they're not going anywhere. We'll have you back. I saw you do another interview once that specifically talked about working, like trying to get something out of actors, and you're the perfect position to talk about this because you've been on both sides of that camera and in that situation. You only have so many hours in a day. You only have so many takes. You only have so many excuses to get another take before you have to move on. What do you do if you're stuck is not the right word, but what do you do if you're stuck with an actor who is not arriving at the performance that you either know that they can pull off, or just, please God, casting director, did we pick the right person that you hope can pull something off? Do you have to just sometimes shoot around someone? It's like, look, I had them on this other day. It was a nightmare. I don't have enough time to give as many, I can't feed this many quarters into the machine. They have to perform. They have to arrive at what it is that that the scene is asking of them, not just the dialogue, but a certain emotional state. What do you do if a performer is not achieving that level of quality?
Sure. So every situation is different, of course. If you're dealing with a child who doesn't understand the words that are coming out of the mouth, you can't suddenly ask them to be smarter because they don't understand the material. Sometimes you do have to defer to, just say it like this, right? And just mimic me. Yeah. And that's one way of getting a performance out of a kid. That's not what you're asking, though. You're asking about getting to an emotional state that services the story properly. So the first thing I do is I try to identify the problem. Actually, the first thing I do is I try to identify the story point that we're trying to get across, because it's all about the story ultimately, right? And I say, can you help me tell this story? This is what the scene is to me. And it's not hard to figure out what the story is about. Sometimes it's right there on the call sheet. It actually says what the scene is about. And sometimes it's in the original outline, because inevitably every scene is a story point. Hopefully, according to the Brad Wright rules of screenwriting, every scene should have a point to it, right? It should forward the story somehow. And if the point of the story is, character X starts to have an emotional breakdown and character Y encourages them or gives them hope, right? If that is in fact what the story is about, character X is obligated to break down so that character Y can support them and motivate them. But if character X is not breaking down, character Y has no function. You cannot say, hey man, keep it together, if they are in fact already kept together, right? So I said, can you help motivate this moment? So I'm eliciting their help in telling the story. That's how I'm going to communicate that with them. Now I have to figure out, some actors are louder and faster. They respond to that, or they need an as if. Can you do it as if your life depended on it? Can you do it as if the stakes are higher? So do you speak actor? Do you speak their language, right? And now, all of that, presumably, all of that has failed in your question. I'm creating a foundation for your question, and all of that has failed. And now I need this actor to lose their self so that the audience can go, oh, they're really wrecked. And I've determined after many, many trials, you say quarters, they're actually takes. Takes take time. Time is money. Sometimes we don't have that. And at the end of the day, I go to the how come room. How come you didn't get your day? And I can't throw the actor under the bus and say, because Buddy couldn't.
You could
emote. Well, I could say that, but that would be
not going to be any good. That's right.
But then I wasn't doing my job as a director. So I'll tell you what, there are wonderful tricks. We do have music, and we can do something with the camera. So if somebody's supposed to be devastated, and the best they can come up with is, there's some things that I can do. I can do a slow push, right? I can have the music crescendo, right? I can create a feeling that wasn't there on the day. I can cut away to the other actor who's emoting their ass off, and they can go, hey man, keep it together. And then say, oh, that person recognizes that the other person is losing their shit, even though they're not losing their shit. But because I did a slight push in, the other actor can tell me, oh, that guy's losing their shit. right? So there are various tricks, and at the end of the day, maybe I can avoid the how come room. And I mean, this is that question you asked me about when Ball was in a spaceship and he was going to get blown up, and I wanted him to have a rich reaction because we were going to really, and he was like, "Nah, I wouldn't. I'm too cool for that." And you called me on that, and I was like, "Oh, well, clearly I don't remember the incident, but I would have asked him to give me and he says, I don't. That's just not the way I roll, even if I am about to die." And I was like, "Okay," and. Maybe we did a push in, maybe we had a crescendo, but at the end of the day, and I think Amanda Tapping used to talk about this all the time, is how many times can you go, oh, before you go, it's getting old. How many times is the world about to explode before you go, I'm pretty sure I've already done this. Look, yeah,
they're gonna make it. We know they're gonna make it, but.
Yeah.
How they make it is what we tune in for, and
yeah.
sometimes they don't.
I hope that answers your question.
It does. Very thoroughly. Thank you.
I have to use trickery, or I use all the tricks in the bag, and if that doesn't work, we're going to post. And sometimes you reshoot. We almost never reshot anything on Stargate. I think the only thing we ever reshot on Stargate was there was a monitor that had a dead pixel, and it was unacceptable. So we had to go back and shoot.
Wow.
Yeah. But that and I wouldn't call it a reshoot, but the Saul Rubinet episode that started as one episode and became two episodes. That was an Andy
Makita special.
And Makita had to deal with that. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And he did with aplomb. Are you aware of any instance where digital tears have ever been used? Not in your work, but have you ever heard of any instances where that was?
Well, I know that they have. I know that digital tears have been added. But there are other tricks that you can do. There was menthol. There was a device that the makeup department had where you would take menthol crystals, and they would load it. They would load it into a chamber, and it had a place to blow on one side, and a way to outlet mentholated air through a filter. So you weren't getting your breath, the spit or your breath, the moisture from your breath wasn't able to go through. Just the air pressure that you created was able to go through, and you would blow. And the menthol, if you've ever had menthol, you know how you rub it on your chest,
vapor rub,
vapor, yes. If you put that close to your eyes, or if you took a tiny bit, and some people did, I know that George Clooney early in his career used to take a little bit of that. And also makes your eyes red, so it makes you just seem upset. So your eyes get somewhat watery, and if you do it just right, you can let the tears collect, and then you can dump them, right? And then so that's for people who cannot manifest a tear through emotional means. They can have a physiological reaction to menthol air being blown into their eyes. But why would you ask me about CGI tears? Why would you do that?
Because I've always been curious. There's a list of things that I've always wanted to ask that are too mundane to bring up on this show, even though I get to talk with actors and directors. How does someone sit around dead for 20 minutes, in a certain shot? And I've gone on YouTube to answer that. I don't want that answered in this episode, but there's certain things that have to be done, and sometimes you have to.
Do you see how the light is hitting me here?
Yes.
On this side. So if I cry, hopefully it's on the lit side,
right?
So you can actually see it. If I drop a tear on this side and it's in the dark, you might not see it. So even though the actor's doing what the scene calls for, they're crying on camera. Yeah, maybe you just don't see it because it doesn't catch the light, and then now it's like, too bad we didn't see the tear, and they actually did all the work. Also, you've got multiple takes, so do we do the close up? Are you ready to cry? Are you all cried out because you cried in the master, and then you cried on the coverage of the other character, and now your tear ducts are dry, and you've got no more water left. Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of it's a problem getting tears to, and then of course. If you're using multiple takes, they drop a tear and then you cut back and then the tear's gone. And you go, where's the tear now?
Exactly. That's the thing. It's gone away. Now, Christopher and Amanda talked about not being able to get through Revelations at the end of season 5, and that long scene aboard the cargo ship where half of it's just silence. Half of it is just them sitting with it's in their mouth like a sock.
Sure.
that they can't get out, that Daniel is gone, and
which is that's an anomaly. You almost never have Stargate material where somebody's not actually talking, right?
And it's extraordinary.
So that's why it really stands out.
For sure. And
so that's the humanity
where they just couldn't get through it dry, and they just said, okay, this is not usable footage. They're in pieces, especially Teal'c, who's supposed to be more stoic. Chris was very to this day is very sensitive, and so you have to strike the balance between the actor and the Jaffa. So
right. Also, there is a balance, and you want them to cry a certain amount, but you don't want them to ugly cry, because now you're getting snot involved, and then the snot's going into their mouth, and you're like, this lacks the entertainment impact that I had hoped for. The snot in the mouth is
episode.
Dude, I'm talking about reality. Like, some people want to just go there, and they turn it all up to 11, and you go,
I have on this show twice.
That was really heavy, but I need another one as a safety tape, because I don't know if we can have the snot running out of your nose and going into your mouth and not have people go, ew, instead of, oh, he's really upset.
No, there are raw places where I've gone. We had a Remembering Don S. Davis episode, and I got through 2.5 hours or 2 hours or something, and I was down to the last 2 minutes and I lost it. And then the episode what wasn't an episode, it was a clip where I announced Cliff's death, and
I remember seeing you announcing Cliff's death.
Man. But anyway,
Cliff was so cool. Don was a prince, man. I love that guy.
Yeah. Were you on the boat when they went and spread his ashes? Oh man, Amanda's boat.
And his hat. They put the ashes in his hat was for good measure. Yeah, I was there. Yeah.
Wow.
John Smith. It was off of John Smith's boat.
John Smith's boat.
They spread it. So they were in Gibson's.
Yes.
Where the original Beachcombers was. And everyone. They had the bit of a ceremony, and then the John took the boat out with Don's family, and the urn with the ashes, and he took it out into the water, and then that's when they cast his ashes into the sea along with his. He had this kind of cool hat that he used to wear, and the hat ended up in the water as well.
And a bottle of RC, I think. I think is what. Ruby said, so because is what he no Royal Crown, not RC, which is what he liked to drink. So I wanted to talk to you about Orpheus.
Sure.
This is a Teal'c episode, and it very much feeds from the fact that his symbiote is gone now. And what do you do when you have lost that which gave you strength? For better or for worse, resents his Goa'uld, but he no longer has it now. He's on Tritonin, and he gets shot where the symbiote would have been, and it sustained a pretty severe injury from a staff wound. Tell us about shooting Orpheus and creating Erebus, this labor camp in another gravel pit in Vancouver.
Right.
How did you find these things? I guess that's just location doing his
locations, job. Man. Yeah, one gravel pit after another. So Orpheus is a reference to going into the underworld or hell and coming back and trying to come back, going to hell and then coming back out. And so that's why I named it that. I in high school I had some experience with Orpheus and Eurydice, and Orpheus descending and Orpheus in the underworld. So I was programmed to remember that So I was like, oh, this feels like Teal'c's version of hell, and he's going in with the Tritonin as a lifeline, and they need to go through their version of the underworld and then come back out, right? And I created the camp, the commandant, the head guy with if you remember, he had the one dead eye,
exactly,
which that was ill-conceived because I'm sure the symbiote could have healed it, but I wanted him to look, unique. And if you recall, he said, "If you do not work, you will die." Right, and that was supposed to be the never-ending message that they were. You just keep working until you die, which is basically what the camp was. So. So it was a work camp, / death camp, and that saying was triggered or an homage or a tip of the hat to Cool Hand Luke. If you recall, what we have here is failure to communicate. Right? But he would just keep hitting them with that line, and then he would punish them. Right? And so that was, to me, that was the motto, the saying, and that was the never-ending. You're all doomed. If you stop working, you're doomed. Yeah. And so that's why I gave him that line. And I wanted this labor camp to be the most horrible, grotesque, the idea that because Jaffa, for the most part, were arguably semi-mortal because they had this healing property, you could work them even harder than you could just normal human beings. And so their work camp had to be even more intense and more unforgiving.
It was Mordor. And, you created Mordor, just no volcano.
That reference was not clear to me at the time, but that I guess that would have been a good one. And I also love the idea that Braytak. And if you recall that one moment where he says to Teal'c's son, "Don't look away." What better way to die than to looking on his son's face?
Your son. Yeah.
And I got choked up on it because my dad's health was not always great, and I always thought that I was envisioning my own father's mortality in that moment when I wrote that line, and I was like, yeah, it's hard, but you have to be there for him. Because this is in that moment. So making it as horrible as possible. Also dealing with Richard Dean Anderson's lack of availability. So naturally we put him in a sniper's nest or way up top. That was a difficult shoot because we had to do a crowd duplication where we had all of our 40 or 50 extras here. And then we put them over here, and then we put them over here, and then so it looked like we had 200 extras, but there was just the same grouping all throughout the camp, and we just put them all together. And having to ask them because we were so far away, but at the best, all I could do was shout at them, and say, and Bill Mizell, our AD, God bless him, he had a walkie-talkie, but of course I just kept screaming.
Bullhorn, Peter, bullhorn.
Yeah. And of course he's got the rifles, he's got the sniper scope, and they're watching from afar, which was an easy way to separate Richard Dean Anderson's contribution. And if you recall, at one point I had him identify two of the airmen that were near him as Hansen and Penhall, which were the character that Johnny Depp and myself played on 21 Jump Street. So that was a little Easter egg in there. Yeah.
Little nods.
I also remember this. I said, well, why don't you say, fire at will? And he said, Peter, I will never say fire at will on camera. And I was like, oh, okay. What do you want to say? And he said, I'll come up with something. I was like, oh, okay, Richard, that's cool. So he's like, and he goes, don't fire on my, when I say so. And then he takes the first shot, if you recall. And then he said, have at her, boys. And I went, oh, well, okay, have at her, boys. Yeah, sure.
Did that make it into the cut? I don't remember. Yeah.
Probably not, because that's probably ultimately, upon closer scrutiny, that wasn't very good. Shoot them to your heart's content. It's not. It's just not. It just doesn't sound very combat macho, right? Yeah.
Look, when he's going after the replicators the next season, he says, "Who's your daddy?" It's perfect, But those are replicators, so it's a video game. In many
do you remember
respects.
Alien? Oh, you want some of this? Oh, I got some here.
You want some over here? Huh? Yeah. That was Hudson run a bypass. Great. Yeah. Oh man, good stuff. No, I would imagine. No, I'm not gonna retread that. We already covered that. Let me go back here to this. This is just a great episode for Christopher, because he really got to dig deep into that character even more, and bringing Neil back for that, and then having Tony back. It was just, you had grandfather, father, and son, and it.
Yeah. Well, that was on purpose. And
it all
the people
worked.
that he cares about. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Man. Okay.
It was a big episode for Chris. Yeah.
I lost my email, my friend. I'll pull this up.
Did you want to talk about Lifeboat, or did you?
I did. I'm trying to get back to it here. Okay. Very good. Yes. All right. Perfect. Yes. Lifeboat. Thank you. Michael's back on the show. And Brad created this tour de force script for him, where it was something that really could exercise his range. And he went and did it. And we got to see 4 or 5 different personalities, including a child who he duplicated his mannerisms perfectly.
Yeah, he was so good at that. So that was a lot of your viewers probably aren't familiar with this, but there's a Sally Field movie for television called Sybil, which he has multiple personalities, and she won an Emmy for it. It was an amazing acting.
You really like me, yeah.
I don't know if that inspired Brad, or there was some sort of trigger in that, but Michael had, he had great acting chops, and this is, I think this is before Brad saw him play. I think he played Macbeth. He's one of the. He
did Hamlet between seasons 2 and 3.
Thank you
so
for.
This was 4 years later.
So Brad had seen him play Hamlet, and so Brad knew that Michael had enormous capabilities that had not been really sort of tasked. So downloading a bunch of personalities into there was for the viewers who have forgotten the premise of the show, is that there's a sleeper ship, and all the there's quite a lot of personalities that have been Farron, the keeper of the ship, has downloaded. He grabs the body of Daniel and uses his brain as a way to capture the memories and to save the life and the personalities of the people that he's put into Daniel's head,
because their bodies are already dead. Yeah.
So Daniel's got more than one person in his brain, and he has to deal with that. And you were going to ask me about working with Tara Rothery as well. She was the perfect, anchor / scene partner for Michael there, and I remember thinking, well, there's no lasers, there's no spaceships, and it's just them in this empty room, and so I think I said, why don't you guys move around? Why don't you play with this and just go where you want to go, be as physical as you want to be, which normally we wouldn't do, because every time you look this way, you have to set up a close up, and now you look this way, and you got to put the camera over there and shoot this way. Right? So I said, just go, right? And I was like, we're going to try something different.
It's a concrete box and one plane of glass, and that's it. You know,
and I wanted it to feel not stable, right? So anyway, that and then of course they did the heck out of it because they couldn't depend on bells and whistles and tricks this time. It was all in his head, literally. So yeah,
and Michael wasn't the only one. Yeah, James Parks played Officer Farron, and it was just magnificent. And I don't want to, and everyone had recently been exposed to Andy Serkis as Gollum fairly recently, and so that was very active in my mind going back to that. So going in, I'm thinking, I've seen this kind of thing before, yes, but he did such an original approach to it, just kind of scrunching down and just having this war with himself as these personalities were taking one taking the front seat, one after the other. It was brilliant acting. And it's an effective episode. And it just shows Brad can put two people in a concrete room and make fireworks. There's
a lot of trust there. Brad, had to be, one, convinced that Michael could pull it off, and two, that the audience would stay for that. So that, to his credit, he knew what he had the tools, and he was able to make that work. So that was not a normal episode, and you're right to point that out. And of course, Parks and Terrell and Daniel, Michael Shanks, they all rose to the occasion and kicked it out of the what do you call it? I'm mixing all my metaphors in. Kicked it into the end zone. They hit it out of the park.
He hit it out of the park.
They hit it out of the park.
Did you watch the Olympics?
They got a bullseye. Yeah. It was awesome.
Eastleyan bunker holder. Eastleyan Burke holder. Apologies. What do you think Urgo is up to now?
Oh, I'm sure he's eating pie and tormenting other communities and trying to get some insight into what they're all about. Yeah.
No. Oh, you don't know what you're missing. No. What an episode with Dom. That was so good. Yeah, and I can't see him lasting in Togar for too long, but I really hope that he put him in some kind of a something or other to at least allow him to persist, because it was such a sincere character. You have an incredible actor and this is my opinion. This is just my opinion. You had an incredible actor come in to play Vala's father near the end of the series. And it was a great actor who has passed now. And in my opinion, it didn't work. It was a perfectly serviceable episode, but in my opinion, it didn't work. And
you mean because he was a con man? Is that what you're talking about?
I just didn't think that the actor worked well with the character. And those kinds of things happen where but there are plenty of people who are like, he was fantastic at that. That there are a couple of roles out there where anyone who has watched enough entertainment will say, I like that actor, but I didn't like them as that character. And I have the same reaction with the new Dr. Smith in Lost in Space. I'm a huge fan of the actress, but when Dom came in to play this character, it's either going to work or it's not. And it was brilliant. And, Urgo is regularly in my top 5. Yeah. Fred Willard, that's right, as Jasek. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And so that's the gamble that you take when you bring in a character or an actor and just hope that it meshes with the character, because a great actor, I forget who said it, but a great actor can elevate a bad script a little bit. But, when the character is so sincerely written, and when you had Dom just chewing on every single, not to mention the fact that he was just trying to make Christopher laugh as much as possible. and just film as much. Let's get as much footage as we can. One of these days, I hope to go through that B-roll. The fact of the matter is, your dad was so sincere with that performance that it couldn't have been anything but gold, in my opinion. And I have come across the occasional person who has said, I wasn't crazy about the episode, and frankly, they're wrong.
I love that you just automatically just are the arbiter of what's wrong and right. And
when it comes to Urgo, I am.
Well, I think once my dad understood the assignment, that he is the personification of everything that they love about life, and
yes.
He went, oh, I can totally do that. And my dad had some very interesting takes on some really cool, highly unlikely exotic characters over his career. And when he saw, or when it came to him what he was being asked to do, he was like, I can do that. Also, the amount of latitude that he was given, but you don't give all actors that kind of latitude, but the amount of latitude that he was given, to Brad's credit, my dad serviced the story as Brad intended, but he was also given permission to expand on that and improvise. And Brad, not only did Brad write it, but Brad had to go through all that enormous amount of material at the end and cobble together, because there were 10 versions of this really great moment, and Brad had to pick which one best was the funniest and will also service that moment in the story.
They have to do those things.
And the way I shot it is I would shoot a two-shot of my dad and the person next to him that he was dealing with, and then I would shoot at the same time. I would shoot my father's close-up, and then when I would shoot the other person's close-up, I keep the two-shot alive so that my dad could keep riffing. Right. My dad got several goes at it, whereas most actors would just have the one opportunity to contribute to the scene, and then we would move on. Right. I loved how touched you are by that, and of course, the fact that he's, if the experiment of what is a life form, i.e., we've heard of this, that Data was a sentient being, so therefore he was self-aware, and then because of that he was officially a life form, even though he was not organic, he was synthetic. So if you took that to its ultimate conclusion, my dad's character was a fully realized sentient being because he was self-aware, but he also included all the traits of all the core characters of SG-1 and all their likes and dislikes and their passions and he was essentially their inner child, all four of theirs inner child, if you will. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
no, it worked.
Yeah, my dad. I think my dad's. He is. I know his humor came across, but his humanity also came across too, and they just turned all the knobs up.
Well, that's it. It's one can say that episode was funny, and that was it's a funny show. It doesn't necessarily mean people are going to remember it 20, 30 years later. It's not that it was funny. It is that it was funny, but it's not that it was funny. It's that it was sincere. And that's what makes it
helps. Well, I'll tell you,
sincere as what's his face is with Elf. It's a sincere performance.
Well, I think you've hit it exactly on the head there, is that Will Ferrell's commitment to the sincerity of it and the humanity of it, and not being afraid to be foolish and vulnerable, of which he did. Foolish and vulnerable are human traits, and so you have no choice as a human being not to empathize and not to be drawn into that. And I'm leaning forward as you would say, "Oh, this is imperfect," but I recognize that. I recognize that childlike behavior. I recognize that desire to be loved, to love and be loved. Right. There's certain things that all humans share in common. If you can tap into those, then people are going to respond to your character for sure.
I want to talk a little bit about being sincere with actors on set, and I wasn't going to ask this question that Elihu, who Elihuwho asked, but I will ask you to open up the hood a little bit for this, and it kind of goes back to getting back to um, becoming accessible with actors. We recently had Simone Bailey and Mike Dopood and Sharon Taylor on. We recorded it in December, and it was a roundtable discussion. And Simone brought up the Jaffa Council scenes in the later seasons of the show, and how you would communicate with the actors for the some of the shots of people like in the council room looking at each other and communicating and or with their eyes and everything else, and she took us through a sequence of how you would do it, and you would be, okay, someone has now farted, and now you must look around like, who done it?
Yeah.
And now please do me a favor, and instead of thinking who, now please rate the fart. Yeah. Now, what is
Simone's giving away all my tricks. Is that a 4?
And that's why I'm asking you to open up the hood a little bit onto this. There is a certain amount of mundanity that you cancel out just by being there, Peter. And I think that that's probably part of the answer that I'm anticipating. And the other part of it is, dude, don't take yourself too seriously. We're here to have a good time. In the scheme of things, we're making ridiculous money and not flipping burgers. Which would you rather do?
We're not curing cancer. You're right.
You're entertaining the people who are curing cancer.
It's a gift. Yes, it's a gift. We get to make movies. We get to entertain. We get to make people laugh. It is absolutely a gift. And there's only so many different ways you can get that. That suspicious. Those shots. And why not have a little bit of fun? I mean, we work some pretty long hours. And did you see that outfit that Simone had to put on? It goes on in every direction forever, and with the hair and the thing and the outfit. Oh my God! And so why not keep it light? Why not? If an actor didn't appreciate that, if they were like, can we try to stay on target here and not get too silly, I would say absolutely say, okay, sure. But as you pointed out, sometimes you don't want to take yourself too seriously, and the who farted direction is gold. It never fails. Right? Yeah. So why not?
You can keep a straight face.
Okay. Yeah.
Because that's the other thing that you're risking is you're taking a chance that everyone in front of you is going to stay professional and not screw up the takes, because I'm sure that's happened as a consequence of you getting someone, do backflips and laugh up here and laugh after the camera is done. But until then, please God, hold it together. So
and being told not to laugh is a recipe for disaster, because when you're trying to suppress it,
that's, I mean, there are certain things that you and I will never speak about on camera that we have spoken on offline, and I will say that anyone who is paying any attention to your Stargate resume can see the holes, and it's like I can only gather and assume that that's because sometimes not everyone appreciates that approach as a director, and that's a shame. That's a true shame, because on set you have to have levity, and that's otherwise, why show up if you're just going to be miserable?
Yeah, your point is not lost on me, and I'm flattered for you saying that. But there's a time and a place for everything. So if sure. The scene called for the Amanda and Chris to be crying over Michael Jackson's Shanks' character dying, then maybe that's not the exact right time to be flip and silly and shallow, right? So I mean, as I said, there's a time and a place for everything, and knowing when those times are, and what you were describing in Jaffa Council, that's pretty dry stuff, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So if the stakes are what they are and you want to reinvest your actors after, after 10 hours of sitting there under the lights and give them something, freshen up, a way to look at the scene, why not? And I love that Simone shared that with you. I'm still going to use that direction in the future. It works with under 10-year-old actors and over 10-year-old actors.
To varying degrees of success in holding it together, I would suspect.
Yeah.
Oh man. Here's one out of left field, and it's one that I don't think that I have asked before. 95% of your work is prep. When it's a more visual effects heavy episode,
Sure.
do you find is there like a square root formula where you just okay, so it's going to have this many pages with visual effects shots in it. I'm going to add this. I'm going to just have to add this number of days in order into my prep work, or do you find it relatively to be the same?
Well, not all. Some directors use shot lists and storyboards, and I don't. For the most part, I don't do that. I edit in my head, and if somebody wants a shot list or they need some references, I will absolutely go through the exercise. But specifically for visual effects, you cannot you can't just wing it because there's budgets involved, and so every shot has a monetary price attached to it. So when we are going to show a spaceship. Or if we're going to show a CG creature, we have to count the amount of times that we're going to see it. So you have to say, well, how are we going to do this? So one way to do a sequence where you have a CG element, let's say a creature in this anecdote. So you start a scene, you see a CG creature. And then a human being comes in the room and they look at the CG creature and they react to it. And you go back to the CG creature. This is the second shot now. And the CG creature responds to the human being that's now in the room. Now the human being has to finish their, the human being has to finish their response. And then when the CG creature either attacks them or leaves the room, I'd say that's 3 shots, right? So that is 3 times we have to pay for that shot. Now, knowing that and knowing that we have a budget, one of the ways that we try to be frugal is we don't establish the creature in the room ahead of time. We have the person come in the space and react to something. Okay, so that means we don't have to establish the person, the creature in the room. We've saved the shot. We've saved a third of the fees. But we wouldn't know that unless I conveyed that to the visual effects people. Right. And they want to know where in the room and how close. How close are we? How much? What level of detail are we gonna have? Right. And same thing with the spaceship. A spaceship. The closer a spaceship gets, so this is a spaceship. The closer the spaceship gets, the more detail it gets. Right. So that becomes more and more expensive. Right.
The last time you were on, you talked about using Prometheus and flipping the shot and doing have it come this way and then coming the other way and being able to. Right. And then Daedalus comes along and it's off centered.
And the Daedalus has that aircraft carrier tower on the one side.
Yeah. You can't flip it.
Just to quickly go on. So what it's heads a spaceship, it goes by the camera and the camera pans with it. Right. So that's one version. You use the same exact shot. And you get the spaceship to go to there and you cut. But it's the same shot, so it's not a secondary amount of money. And then you start the shot from that moment to the pan. That's a third use of that same shot, right? Now what you do is you flip it, so left is right and right is left, and you get 3 more uses of the shot, except if you have
the comm tower.
A comm tower on one side of the ship, you can't just flip that because you can't re-render it. You can't say the thing on this side. It was on this side. Now you flip the image, and now the tower is on this side. So that doesn't work. So you've limited your amount of usage. So if you're trying to be frugal, that was one way of doing it. So I always went, oh, why shouldn't it be symmetrical? And Brad was really on board with wanting it to look like an aircraft carrier. So I said, oh, okay.
You do what you can with the approach that the creator wants.
And we used, if you look at the puddle pass through from 1969, I ended up using that several times, so we didn't have to create it and re-render it. So in 1969, Michael Shanks had a Zat on his hip and also a big floppy hat, and he hated both of those things immensely. And I would say to him, "But I just need you to do it going up." On the way going up to the shot preceding that shot, and then as soon as we get to the other side, you can get rid of that. And he was like, okay. I said, so it saves a lot of money and all the time it takes to create the shot of you guys walking up to the puddle. So it was rare, but it was a way to be frugal and spend money on stuff they hadn't seen. They've already seen the team walking into the Stargate, right? And then sometimes there was a very unsatisfying way to get to the Stargate is you'd show the puddle without any tie-ins to the actors, and then you'd show the group at the bottom of the ramp looking at it, and then they would start to walk up out of the frame, and we would do a wormhole transition to the planet. And I go, it's not satisfying, and we're avoiding the namesake of the show, the Stargate. It feels like we should see the Stargate. We should.
That was my frustration with Atlantis a lot of the time, because they never had a full location Atlantis Gate, and so you couldn't do things like blur it in the background with lights on it like you do beautifully in Redemption. Like you see it out of focus in the background there. It's always a presence, and that was one of the things that I had issue with Atlantis, was that anytime you saw it, it cost money because it was a CG element, and it was just buried in the ground because there was no pedestal. And the thing that I loved that they did was they managed to recycle more than once shots of coming through the puddle. There's a shot in the fifth race where they come out, and I think Daniel's wearing his hat at that time, and before Jack gets his head sucked, and that was used again in Urgo. The second time they go to his planet, they have them, and then they get beamed away to Togar's lab, and it's the same shot from the fifth race, and they're just reusing it. They're just cutting to earlier in the take when they weren't standing on the pedestal. It just works. You find ways to save money and put it into new stuff, like little frog creatures under glass, and later on taking their things out of their brains.
Spend it in different ways. Yeah,
that's it.
That's it,
man. Yeah. We're gonna wrap up here at Chironian Canuck 482. I admire how Peter takes time to thoroughly explain things and enjoys interacting with us fans. Clever, humble, a Vancouverite, which is a plus, and overall a good man. One of my favorite interviewees. Peter DeLuise, always a pleasure to have you.
That wasn't a question. That was just a straight out compliment. Thanks, dude.
This is my my way of working our way toward the end here. It's always a pleasure to have you, and it's going to be back at least once more in Vancouver this year. I hope that you'll be free and available then, so that we can hook up again. And it's always good to see you, man. So it's a pleasure to hear these stories.
Yeah, you're more attractive than ever, so we should definitely get together.
You know how to butter a man up for sure.
Yeah.
Peter, thanks
for having me, and thank you again for your continuing work on documenting the behind the scenes of Stargate.
It is my privilege.
It was a really good show, and it deserves the kind of respect and dignity that you're giving it, and I appreciate that.
Absolutely, it deserves a fourth iteration. You feel me?
Hell yeah, I feel you.
Let's do it. Let's just do it. Let's just go. Let's not ask. Let's just turn up. I'll see you in London. Yeah. Peter, thank you.
Thank you.
You be well,
Cheers.
Sir. Bye-bye. Peter DeLuise, everyone, writer, producer, director, Stargate. My name is David Reed. You're watching the Stargate Oral History Project. If you enjoy Stargate and you want to see more content like this on YouTube, please click the like button. It does make a difference and will help the show continue to grow its audience. And consider sharing the video with a Stargate friend. And if you want to get notified about future episodes, click subscribe. And if you give the bell icon a tick, we'll notify you the moment a new video drops, and you'll get my notifications of any last-minute guest changes. And clips from this live stream will be released over the course of the next few weeks on both the Dial the Gates and GateWorld.net YouTube channels. Tremendous thanks to my moderating team who just pulled out all the stops for this episode. I cannot get through these shows without them. Anthony, Raj, Enigma, really appreciate you guys. Marcia and Anthony are going to be coming up on Gildert Jackson, who's going to be joining us in about 10 minutes to take us back to Before I Sleep and Janice and bringing us up to speed on what's going on with him. And we have a whole host of new shows heading your way later on this week and into next week. DialTheGate.com has all of those details. My name is David Reed for Dial the Gate. I appreciate you tuning in, and I will see you on the other side.